Some marriages don't end in a single, screaming fight. They end quietly in the half second it takes to watch the person you love wear a face you've never seen before. My daughter was the one who said it. Over pancakes on an ordinary Saturday. "Mom, let's fly out and surprise Dad." I said yes. I booked the tickets myself. I spent the whole flight picturing the moment he'd open that door, the surprise. Then the joy, then that particular warmth he always saved for our little girl. I didn't understand yet, that morning, that some doors are better left unopened. Because when my husband finally saw us standing there, 2,000 miles from home, the first thing that crossed his face wasn't joy. It was fear. My name is Eleanor Hayes, though no one who loves me has called me anything but Nell in 44 years. I live outside Charleston, South Carolina, in a weathered low-country house with a live oak in the yard so old and wide that Spanish moss hangs from it like the whole tree is remembering something. In autumn, the light comes through those branches gold and slow, and I have stood at my kitchen window more mornings than I can count, coffee going cold in my hand, thinking there is nowhere on earth I would rather be. For 12 years, I've kept the books for a group of family medical practices. I am the person who finds the $11 that doesn't belong, the duplicate invoice, the decimal that wandered one place to the left. People assume that kind of work is joyless. It isn't, not to me. I love a column that balances. I love the quiet certainty of numbers that tell the truth even when people won't. Give me a ledger and I can tell you the story of someone's whole year, what they feared, what they hoped for, what they quietly gave up. Numbers were never a chore I tolerated. They were how I understood the world. I mention this because it matters later. Remember that I was good with numbers. Remember that seeing was never my problem. I married Daniel when I was 26, and certain the feeling would never dim. And I won't pretend it didn't. 18 years does something to a marriage that no one warns you about while you're young and burning. The fireworks settle, they become a grocery list stuck to the fridge in his handwriting, a hand resting on the small of my back while we watched the evening news. The small comfort of knowing exactly how someone takes their coffee black. 2 sugars. In the chipped mug he refused to throw away because I'd given it to him our first Christmas. I had always believed that steadiness was worth more than fireworks. I still believe it. Actually, steadiness kept us through a miscarriage, a layoff, the year his mother was dying, and he slept in a hospital chair for 6 weeks. Steadiness is not a small thing. Steadiness is what you build a life out of, brick by ordinary brick. What I didn't understand, what I couldn't have understood, standing at that gold-lit window, was that somewhere along the way, Daniel and I had stopped agreeing on what steadiness meant. To me, it was a foundation. To him, I would learn. It had become a cage. But that came later. That autumn, all I knew was that my husband traveled more than he used to, that our 13-year-old daughter missed him in that fierce, particular way daughters miss their fathers, and that our house, good and warm and full of small rituals, had started to feel just slightly emptier than it should. I told myself it was nothing. A busy season. Every marriage has them. I was a woman who could find a single missing dollar in 10,000. And I never once thought to look at my own life the way I looked at those books. It started, as these things do, with reasons that were easy to believe. Over the last 6 months, Daniel's travel had thickened. A regional conference in Dallas, a hospital procurement team in Denver that needed hand-holding, a product launch, a compliance review, a client who would only meet on Thursdays. Each explanation arrived in his easy, confident voice. The voice that had once talked to hospital board out of a competitor's contract and into ours. Charm was his profession. I had married a man who could make you feel like the most important person in the room, and I had never once considered that a talent like that might be turned on me. The Denver trip, he said, mattered more than the rest, a contract worth more than his last 3 combined. He told me the name of the hotel without my asking the same downtown business tower his company always booked, the one with his loyalty points and his usual corner room. I know now that this was not honesty. It was architecture. A man building an alibi leaves the front door unlocked on purpose. Later, I would understand that those hotel nights, dutifully expensed to his company, were part of a paper trail he needed to look ordinary. But that night, all I heard was a husband with nothing to hide. When I suggested a video call one evening, he waved it off. The days were long, the meeting rooms crowded. He'd rather just hear my voice on the phone. I didn't think twice. Why would I? It was Grace who changed everything. The way children do sideways, without meaning to. One Saturday morning, over a plate of pancakes with syrup pooling at the edge, my daughter looked up at me with an expression I knew instantly, the one she gets when she's already decided something and is just gathering the courage to say it out loud. "Mom," she said, "what if we flew out and surprised Dad?" I laughed. She didn't, and the longer I looked at her syrup on her chin, eyes bright and certain, the more something in me softened. Guilt, maybe. We hadn't done much together, the 3 of us, in longer than I wanted to admit. I told myself this trip could fix that, could remind us what we were to each other. I asked for that Friday off. I booked 2 seats and a room at the very hotel Daniel had named. That evening, Grace spent a full hour at the kitchen table making him a card, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. When she finally showed it to me, it read, in careful looping letters, "We missed you too much to stay home." She'd already picked out what she would wear, the gray hoodie with the little embroidered fox on the sleeve, the one Daniel had given her last Christmas. She chose it on purpose, I think. Some instinct in her understood it would mean something to him to see her in it. I called him that night and told a small, harmless lie that Grace and I would be busy all weekend, so he shouldn't worry if we were hard to reach. I only wanted to keep him from calling while we were in the air and spoiling the surprise. He didn't ask a single question. If anything, he sounded relieved. "Good," he said. "You 2 should have a girls' weekend." I would replay that sentence 100 times later, turning it over like a stone, looking for the crack I should have seen. We were up before the sun, the alarm cutting through the dark at 4:30. The house holding that particular hush that only exists before dawn. Grace was already awake when I knocked on her door, pulling the gray fox hoodie over her head, her hair still creased from the pillow. She'd packed the night before, checked and rechecked, she told me, so we wouldn't be those people holding up the security line, 13 years old and already embarrassed by the idea of being a spectacle. I hid a smile. The drive to the airport was quiet, rain tapping against the windshield. The highway nearly empty except for the occasional pair of headlights drifting past in the other direction. Grace sat curled against the door with the card in her lap, checking every few minutes that the corners hadn't bent in her backpack. "Do you think it'll get crushed?" she asked. "I'll wrap it in a plastic sleeve at the gate," I said. That seemed to settle her. She talked through this whole plan while we waited to board, hands moving through the air the way they did when she was excited. She wanted to be the one to knock. I should stand off to the side, out of the peephole's view, so Dad would see her first. Then we'd both count to 3 and yell it together. She practiced the word under her breath, surprised like it was a small spell she was afraid of getting wrong. But she wasn't only a child playing pretend. Halfway through, she paused and studied me with those quick eyes of hers. "Do you think Dad's been sad?" she asked. "He's been weird on the phone, like he's somewhere else." I told her he'd been busy. Work. She nodded slowly, the way she does when she accepts an answer without quite believing it, and went back to the card. I should have listened to her more closely. Children notice the weather in a house long before adults name the storm. I texted Daniel before boarding, "Hope the presentation goes well. We love you." His reply came almost instantly. "Going into meetings. Phone may be off all day." Something snagged, small and quiet, in the back of my mind. The night before, he'd told me his presentation was yesterday, not today. But conference schedules shift. I'd worked in enough offices to know how often a plan changes by the hour. I let it go. As we taxied toward the runway, a second message arrived. "Don't wait up tonight. Client dinner." And there it was again, that faint sense that he was clearing the day in advance, sealing the hours shut before I could reach into them. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was a tired woman on 4 hours of sleep, reading meaning into an ordinary text. I put my phone on airplane mode. Beside me, Grace pulled down the window shade so she wouldn't have to watch the ground fall away. "Tell me when we're up," she said, and closed her eyes. I held her hand as the engines roared. I was so sure I was carrying us towards something good. Denver met us with a hard, bright cold, a wind coming straight off the mountains that cut through my coat like it wasn't there. Grace pressed her face to the train window as the skyline rose out of the flat brown plain, all glass and snow glare, and for a moment I let myself feel it too, the thrill of arriving somewhere new, somewhere our family didn't usually go, a mum. We took the light rail into downtown, then walked the last few blocks to the hotel Daniel had named an elegant business tower near the river. Revolving door, a lobby that smelled of cedar and cold flowers. We checked into our own room first. Grace wanted to go straight up to his floor, tugging at my sleeve, practically vibrating. "We can't just wander the halls," I told her. "Let me confirm his room number so we knock on the right door." At the front desk, a young woman looked up with a practiced, pleasant smile. I explained that I was hoping to add my name to my husband's reservation, Daniel Hayes, here for the medical device conference, and surprise him. She typed. Then she stopped typing, and something in her face rearranged itself into professional care. "I'm sorry, ma'am, for privacy reasons. I'm not able to confirm or share details about another guest. Even a spouse. You'd need him to add you himself." I nodded. Of course. Reasonable. I almost turned away. "Is there any way," I asked, "to just tell me if the medical conference block is still checked in? We came a long way to surprise him." She hesitated, then offered the one thing she was allowed to give. "The conference block the medical device group checked out yesterday afternoon. That event's over." I stood there, and the words simply would not fit into what I knew, like forcing a puzzle piece into the wrong slot. Daniel had told me the conference ran through Sunday. He had told me, this morning, that he was walking into meetings. I said thank you. My voice came out even. I've been told I have a gift for staying level when the ground moves, and I suppose that was the first time I ever needed it. I called him. Straight to voicemail. I turned the phone over in my hand, trying to build some version of events that made sense, an extension, a second event, a separate booking under the company name, when Grace stood up from the lobby chairs and pointed through the tall front windows. "Mom," she said, "isn't that Dad?" I turned. Across the street, through the thin gray afternoon light, a man in a familiar brown wool coat was walking toward the glass doors of a serviced apartment building, the kind executives rent by the month. all clean lines and quiet awnings. I would have known that walk anywhere. 18 years of watching a man cross a room teaches you the shape of him, even from behind, even through glass, even in a city that isn't yours. I knew the coat. I'd bought it 2 winters ago at an outlet, complaining the whole drive home about the price. I knew the leather bag on his shoulder, the one I'd given him for his 45th birthday, his initials stitched into the strap, and I knew he wasn't walking in alone. A woman had her arm looped through his, her head tilted toward his shoulder, laughing at something he'd said. My stomach dropped before my mind had even caught up to what my eyes had already understood. I did not run across that street. Some cold, steady part of me, the part that finds the missing dollar, the part that does not flinch when the numbers go wrong, took over. I told Grace I had to sort out a mix-up with Dad's reservation and asked her to stay in the room and watch something. She agreed, a little disappointed, already reaching for the remote. Then I walked out of our hotel, crossed the street, and sat in the far corner of a small cafe inside that apartment building, ordering a coffee I had no intention of drinking. I watched the elevator bank and the front doors, and I waited. 20 minutes. That is how long I sat there, hands wrapped around a cup, going cold, learning what patience really costs. Then the elevator opened and Daniel walked out with the same woman, both of them dressed for dinner now, her in a fitted black dress, him in the navy jacket I had steamed for him myself before he left. This was not 2 colleagues wrapping up a meeting. This had rhythm. It had habit built into it, the particular ease that only comes from repetition. He rested his hand at the small of her back, the way he used to rest it on mine while we watched the evening news. They passed close to where I sat, and I heard her voice, low and warm, not meant for me but carrying anyway in that quiet lobby. Once, it's final, we won't have to keep hiding. I stood up. My legs moved before my mind had fully caught the sentence. Daniel! Just that, flat and clear. He turned, and I watched his face do something I will never forget. The easy, practiced calm slid off it in an instant, the salesman's warmth, the confidence that had carried him through 1,000 rooms, all of it gone, replaced in a heartbeat by something closer to raw fear. The woman looked between us, her smile faltering into confusion. "What are you doing in Denver?" Daniel asked me, as though I were the one who owed an explanation. "Our daughter wanted to surprise her father," I said. His face went the color of the sidewalk. The woman looked at me properly now, taking in my coat, my face, searching for a context that made sense. "Your daughter, I'm Nell Hayes," I said. "Daniel's wife." I watched the words land on her like something physical. Her arm slid slowly from his. She said her name Vivian, though I barely registered it at the time, and I could see, plainly, that she was as blindsided as I was, only from a different direction. It came out over the next few minutes in halting, disbelieving fragments. Vivian believed Daniel and I had been separated for nearly a year. She believed we lived in different houses. She believed the divorce had been filed and was simply waiting on a judge's signature. He had shown her a photograph of the papers. Pages spread across a kitchen table she'd assumed was his own. I had never seen those papers. I had certainly never signed a thing. I watched her face shift from confusion to something colder as the truth settled over her too. She hadn't only been lied to about a marriage, she had been made complicit in a fiction, unknowingly. For months, a supporting character in a story written to keep 2 women from ever comparing notes. Daniel tried to speak, something about a complicated situation, a misunderstanding. I did not raise my voice. I have never needed volume to be heard. "How long?" I asked him. "Have you been telling people our marriage was over?" He didn't answer. He didn't have one, or if he did, he wasn't brave enough to say it out loud. In that lobby, in front of two women who had each, in her own way, trusted him with a version of the truth he'd invented for his own convenience. Then I turned to Vivian. Whatever anger I might have aimed at her had nowhere to land. She looked like I felt. "You believed the same man I did," I told her. "The difference is I believed him for 18 years. She didn't argue. She just looked at the floor. And I understood that in that moment, we were not rivals. We were two people standing in the wreckage of the same lie, holding different pieces of it. Before I left that lobby, I turned to Daniel one last time and told him quietly, without drama, that Grace had seen nothing. Not the woman, not the building, none of it. And that he was not to come to our room. If he wanted to see his daughter, he would text me, and I would decide when and how. He started to follow me anyway, already reaching for some explanation he thought might soften what I'd seen. I stopped him at the door. "You had months to tell me the truth," I said. "You chose this instead." He didn't follow me further. The walk back across that street was the longest of my life, because the hardest part of that day wasn't what I had just witnessed. It was climbing the stairs to a room where a 13-year-old still believed her father was going to cry happy tears when he saw her. Grace was cross-legged on the bed when I came in, the card resting in her lap, half watching a cartoon with the sound low. She looked up and I watched her face change the instant she really saw mine. Children read you before you've said a single word. She had done it her whole life. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Not where's Dad? What's wrong?" I sat on the edge of the bed. I did not lie to her, and I did not tell her everything. There is a narrow, painful road between those two, and every mother walks it eventually. "Your father made some choices," I said, "that have hurt our family. I'm still trying to understand them myself." She was quiet a moment, turning the card over in her hands. "Why did you say you were in meetings?" she asked to the empty air, to the version of him that wasn't there. "He texted me too. He said he was busy." Her voice wobbled, small and young and wounded. "He wasn't even at the conference, was he?" It wasn't really a question. I shook my head. She looked down at the fox on her sleeve, and then she said the thing I have carried with me ever since, not shouted, not dramatic, just plain, the way only a child can hand you the truth you've been avoiding. "You told me," she said, "that lying is what people do when they're scared of the truth." I had told her that years ago, over some small fib about homework. I'd forgotten it completely. She hadn't. An hour later, there was a knock. I had texted him where and when. Grace reached the door before I could stop her, but she slowed when she saw both our faces, mine carefully composed. His raw and uncertain in a way I had rarely seen. She still handed him the card. He unfolded it slowly and read the looping letters. "We missed you too much to stay home." And I watched something in him break open. For the first time all day, he wasn't performing. Whatever crossed his face then was real, the beginning, maybe, of understanding what his choices had actually cost. Grace didn't hug him. She stepped back to stand beside me. And in that small movement, that quiet choosing of sides, I understood that the person who would spend the longest healing from this was not going to be me. It was going to be her. That night, after Daniel left and Grace had finally fallen asleep with the television still murmuring, my phone lit up with a message from an unfamiliar number. It was Vivian. She'd found me somehow, social media, maybe, or a business card of mine Daniel had left in some drawer of that apartment. She wanted she said, to tell me everything. I almost didn't answer, but some instinct told me I needed to know exactly what I was standing in, so I let her talk. Over the next hour, in a long unraveling of messages, she laid out 9 months of a relationship built on a story Daniel had constructed with real care. He'd told her we separated almost a year ago. He said he'd been staying at the Denver apartment on business trips ever since, slowly building a life there ahead of a permanent move once the divorce was finalized. She sent screenshots, conversations where he wrote it plainly. Nell already signed, just waiting on the court date. In another, he explained he'd used money from his portion of our assets to cover the deposit on the apartment they'd been sharing part-time for months. I sat on the edge of the bathroom sink with the door shut so I wouldn't wake Grace, and I opened our banking app with hands that were almost steady. Here is the thing I need you to understand. I am not a woman who misses money. It is my profession and my nature to notice the $11 that doesn't belong. If those transfers had ever crossed an account I actually watched, I would have caught them the same week. But the investment account was the one Daniel managed. He'd taken it over years ago. You handle the house. I'll handle the market. No sense both of us stressing about it, and I had let him. Not because I couldn't read it, because I trusted him. In 18 years, I had never once logged in. That was the account he chose, and he chose it precisely because he knew the one place my careful eyes would never look was the place I had handed to him out of love. The withdrawals had been going on for 6 months. I scrolled, and the numbers assembled themselves in my mind the way they always do, telling their quiet, terrible story. $4,800 in February, $7,200 in April, $9,500 in June. Smaller amounts threaded between, spaced out, routed into personal accounts I'd never seen. And none of these were sums a person overlooks. $9,500 is a used car. It is 2 months of a lot of people's lives. He hadn't hidden them by making them small. He'd hidden them behind my trust. Altogether, when I finished, when I had every figure laid end to end the way I would for any client's audit, it came to nearly $78,000, gone. Quietly rerouted from the future we were supposedly building together into the one he was building without us. I sat there a long time with the phone glowing in my hands, and I did a different kind of arithmetic. The kind that has nothing to do with money. I counted the missed video calls, the crowded meeting rooms, the client dinners I was told not to wait up for, the Thursdays, the phone may be off all day. Every small excuse I had accepted without a second thought, not because I was foolish, but because I loved the man handing them to me, and love had made me generous with my believing. I am very good with numbers. I always have been. I had simply never thought to audit my own marriage. We changed our flights and flew home the next morning. Daniel stayed behind, telling us he needed to sort things out with work. Though I understood by then, he simply didn't have the nerve to sit beside us on that plane. The flight home was nothing like the flight out. Grace didn't talk. The card sat folded at the bottom of her backpack. The crease from the trip already pressed permanently into the paper. She spent most of the flight with her forehead against the window, watching the clouds slide past, and every so often she'd ask a question I didn't fully know how to answer. Is Dad going to leave us? Is this my fault for wanting to come? That one broke something in me. I turned in my seat so she could see my whole face, because some promises have to be made with your eyes as much as your voice. Listen to me, I said. None of this is yours to carry. Your father made his choices a long time before you ever suggested a trip. And whatever happens between him and me, whatever changes, you will never, not for one single day, be abandoned. Not by me, not by him. Do you understand? She nodded. I don't think she believed it entirely. Not yet. But she let me hold her hand the rest of the way down, and that was enough for one flight. Once we were home, I did not fall apart the way some part of me wanted to. I didn't cry in front of her. I didn't call my sister and scream. I didn't do the thing the movies would have had me do. Instead, I got organized. I think that surprised even me, but it shouldn't have. Order is how I have always survived the things I cannot control. When the ground moves, I reach for the ledger. So I worked, quietly, methodically, the way I'd work through any account that didn't add up. I backed up every bank and investment statement I could pull. I photographed our tax returns, the mortgage, the deed to the house. I saved Vivian's screenshots into 3 separate places. I changed the passwords on my own accounts. And I put copies of our birth certificates, passports, and insurance records somewhere Daniel would never think to look. And here is what I did not do. I did not drain a single joint account. I did not touch $1 that wasn't already mine to touch. I did not smash his things, or cut up his suits, or write a word of it online for the neighbors and strangers to feast on. I did not turn our daughter into a weapon or our street into an audience. Some steady instinct in me understood, even in the rawest hours of that week, that how I carried this would matter, not only for the divorce that was surely coming, for the woman I would still have to face in the mirror long after it was done. He had built his whole scheme on the belief that I would fall apart. I decided, very calmly, that I would not give him the satisfaction. I found a divorce attorney named Margaret Cole through a coworker who'd gone through her own hard separation 2 years earlier. Margaret was calm in a way that felt almost clinical, which was exactly what I needed. I came to her with a folder labeled, tabbed, dated, and I watched her eyebrows lift slightly as she turned the pages. Most people come to me with their heartbreak, she said. You came with an audit? She told me the things I needed to hear, in the flat. Steadying voice of someone who has watched this happen 100 times. Money moved during a marriage, she explained, generally still counts as shared property, regardless of whose name sits on the account. If Daniel had used our joint funds to support a relationship outside our marriage, that spending could be counted back against his share when everything was divided. She recommended a forensic accountant. She recommended I document everything and confront nothing until our footing was secure. And she cautioned me, gently but firmly, about one thing. Do not keep him from your daughter unless there's a genuine safety concern. I know the instinct, but punishing him through her only ends up costing her more than it costs him, I told her, in a moment of raw honesty, that some part of me wanted him to lose everything. She looked at me evenly. Your goal isn't to destroy him, she said. It's to keep him from destroying what's left. I have carried that sentence with me ever since. It became the line I walked for the next 9 months, the difference between justice and revenge, which are not the same thing, no matter how alike they feel at 2 a.m. The forensic accountant confirmed what I already suspected, and then some. Nearly $78,000 had moved out of our investment account into personal accounts Daniel controlled alone. Some covered the Denver apartment. Some went to jewelry, weekend trips, a deposit meant to make that apartment permanent. And worse, several of those trips had been submitted to his company as legitimate business travel and reimbursed. He had not only stolen from our future, he had defrauded his employer to fund the lie and left a paper trail doing it. But it was the last discovery that took the breath out of me. tucked inside our shared cloud storage in a folder I'd forgotten even existed. One we'd made years ago and labeled, of all things. Wedding photos was a document, a draft separation agreement, quietly assembled over months. In it, Daniel proposed that I keep the house and take on the full mortgage alone, that he keep the bulk of his retirement account, that he relocate to Denver, and that Grace our Grace see him during select holidays, as though our daughter were a line item to be scheduled rather than a child to be loved. He had been drafting his exit from our family inside the folder that held our beginning. When I showed Margaret, she was quiet a moment. Then she told me something that changed the shape of everything ahead. "South Carolina lets you file on fault grounds," she said. "Adultery is one of them. Most people wait out a year of separation because they have to. You don't. With what Vivian's given us, the messages, the receipts, the photo of the fake papers he showed her, we don't wait. We file on adultery, and we move." For the first time since Denver, I felt something other than grief. I felt the ground go still beneath my feet. Daniel came home 3 days later. I think he expected tears, shouting, some version of me falling to pieces on the kitchen floor, begging him to stay, making it easy for him to feel like the one being chased instead of the one who'd run. Instead, he walked in and found the financial documents laid out across the kitchen table. Neat, labeled, dated. The whole architecture of his second life. Printed and organized by the wife he'd assumed would never look. He glanced at them, and I watched the calculation move behind his eyes, the salesman looking for the angle. "That money was a personal bonus," he said. "It's separate. It has nothing to do with us." I didn't raise my voice. I had done my raising of the voice in private, into a pillow, where it belonged. "It went into our joint account first," I said. "Before you quietly moved it out, I have the dates, I have the transfers, I have all of it. Daniel, you know I'm good with numbers. You just forgot I'd ever bother to look." He changed tactics the way he always did when charm failed. He went on the offensive. "So you went digging through my accounts. You violated my privacy." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so exactly, perfectly him. "Privacy," I said, "is closing the bathroom door. This was deception. Those aren't the same thing, and I think somewhere underneath all of this, you know it." He had no answer for that, either. But here is the part I want you to understand, because it is the part that mattered most to me in the end. I did not have to destroy him. I never made a single call to his company. I never sent one message, never filed one complaint, never breathed a word to the people he worked with. I didn't have to. His own paperwork did it for him. Those trips he'd logged as client visits, the hotel charges that matched no meeting on any calendar. The reimbursements for weekends spent 2,000 miles from any account he managed his company noticed the pattern on their own. There was no dramatic confrontation, no handcuffs, nothing out of a television drama. He was quietly suspended pending an internal review, required to repay every misused dollar, and stripped of the management title he'd worn like a second skin for a decade. Rather than wait for the investigation to reach its public conclusion, he resigned. And the photograph, the one he'd staged so carefully. The fake divorce papers spread across a kitchen table to convince Vivian our marriage was already over, that came back for him too. Vivian sent it to Margaret herself, along with everything else. The very lie he'd built to keep two women apart became, in the end, the evidence that tied the whole scheme together. His own fiction, handed over as fact. He blamed me at first, said I'd destroyed his career, as though I'd been the one filing his expense reports. I reminded him, without raising my voice, that I had never contacted his company at all. His own choices had done that, every one of them. There is a particular kind of justice that requires nothing from you but the patience to let a man be measured by the exact standard he set for everyone else. I didn't build the trap. He did, brick by careful brick. In a folder marked wedding photos. I just stopped being the person who refused to look inside it. The divorce moved forward through the fall and into winter slow, the way these things are slow. A war fought in folders and signatures rather than words. But the paperwork was never the part that kept me up at night. Grace was. For the first few weeks, she refused to see her father at all. I never pushed her toward forgiveness. I know the temptation you want the wound closed quickly. For everyone's sake, most of all, your own. But a child's trust is not a thing you can order back into place. And I had promised myself I would not hand her a lesson that healing means pretending. So I didn't force it. What I did instead was find her someone to talk to who wasn't me. A family therapist named Dr. Ruiz, a woman who specialized in adolescents walking through the particular wreckage of a parent's divorce. Daniel texted her every day, "I want to be fair to him here. Because fairness is the only thing that let me sleep, he did not disappear. Every single day, a message. Good morning, Gracie. Thinking about you. I'm here whenever you're ready." She read them. I know she read them, because I'd see the little marker change on her phone. She just didn't answer. Not out of cruelty, out of something quieter and harder to name. A 13-year-old's silence can hold more than any slammed door. One evening, I found her cleaning out her closet. She had the gray fox hoodie in her hands, and she was folding it carefully, the way you fold something you're putting away rather than something you're keeping close. She didn't throw it out. She didn't cut the fox off the sleeve in some furious little act of grief. She simply folded it and set it at the very bottom of a drawer, under the sweaters she never wore, and closed it without a word. I didn't say anything. Some griefs a mother has to let her daughter carry in her own hands, at her own pace. But I understood exactly what I'd watched. That hoodie had been chosen, on a cold morning in October, to make her father smile. Now it was something she couldn't quite look at. Daniel, to his credit, started therapy of his own. And for the first time since I'd known him in 18 years of a man who could explain his way out of any room, he began to own his choices out loud instead of talking around them. He told Dr. Ruiz, and eventually Grace, that what he'd done wasn't a mistake but a series of decisions, made on purpose, that had hurt the two people he was supposed to protect most. He didn't ask to be forgiven on a schedule. To his credit, he didn't seem to expect it to work that way anymore. It was months into this new, careful rhythm when Grace said the thing that told me she was going to be all right. We were on the porch steps, the evening going that particular shade of gold it turns in late Carolina summer. When she spoke without looking at me, "I still love Dad," she said. "I just don't trust him yet." I let the sentence sit a moment before I answered, because it deserved that. "You're allowed to feel both," I told her, and I meant it more than I think she understood that love and mistrust can live in the same chest at the same time, and that holding both is not weakness. It's honesty. It's the beginning of the kind of trust that, if it ever comes back real. 9 months passed the way hard years sometimes do slow in the living. And then, looking back, all at once, the divorce was finalized in early spring. I refinanced the mortgage in my own name, nervous through every page of it. And I kept the house. That mattered more than the walls it saved. It meant Grace didn't have to change schools, didn't have to say goodbye to her friends, Didn't have to leave the live oak she'd been climbing since she was 6. Some mornings, I'd find her sitting up in its low branches with a book, the way she had as a little girl. And I'd think we kept this. Whatever else we lost, we kept this. I picked up freelance bookkeeping in the evenings, a flower shop first, then a family hardware store, word spreading slowly the way it does when people learn they can trust you with their numbers. Eventually, it became something of my own. A small practice, built one client at a time. It was not the kind of transformation you see in a movie. No dramatic reveal, no sudden fortune, just steady, reasonable independence. Assembled the only way I've ever known how to build anything, brick by ordinary brick. One cold morning that second winter, I came downstairs and found Grace at the kitchen table in the gray fox hoodie. I didn't say a word about it. I just poured the coffee, but something in my chest loosened that had been clenched for over a year. She wasn't wearing it to make anyone smile this time. She wasn't making a statement. It was simply cold. And the hoodie was warm, and it had become, at last, just a piece of clothing again, no longer a wound she couldn't look at. The trust hadn't come back whole. It never fully will. But it hadn't been burned to the ground either. It had just, quietly, learned to live in the same house as the truth. I understand something now that I couldn't have named that first morning at the window. I knew exactly how my husband took his coffee black. 2 sugars, in the chipped mug from our first Christmas. I could have told you that in my sleep. And all that time, I had not known there was a second life running underneath the one we shared, a whole country away. The same man, 2 truths. You can know the small, tender shape of a person's daily habits and still not know the shape of what they're capable of hiding. Almost a year after that first trip, Grace and I flew back to Denver, just the 2 of us this time. We walked along the river with the wind coming off the mountains the same way it had before. Except this time, it didn't feel like something I had to brace against. It was just wind. We ate too much, wandered a museum for an afternoon, took a photo in front of the water with the skyline behind us, both of us squinting and laughing. The surprise we had carried into that city a year before had ended in the worst way I could have imagined. This time, there was no surprise, only the 2 of us. And a truth we'd already survived, and a city that could no longer hurt us. We flew to Denver because my daughter wanted to surprise her father. Instead, we found the life he'd been hiding from us. For a long time, I believed that trip was the thing that ended my family. I understand now that isn't quite right. Denver didn't create the lie Daniel had been living. It only made it impossible for that lie to keep hiding. The truth hurt more than almost anything I've known, but it also handed back something I hadn't realized I'd lost the right to decide. Clearly and honestly, what the rest of my life was going to look like. Our family doesn't resemble what it used to be, but it's still a family just built differently now, on steadier ground than the ground I never knew I'd been standing on. Healing, I've learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about reaching a place where the memory no longer gets to decide what tomorrow becomes. For a long time, I thought that trip ended my family. Now I understand it ended the lie. And sometimes the end of a lie is exactly where your real life begins. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to know where it found you tonight. And if you've ever had to rebuild not just your own life, but your child's trust after a betrayal, tell me in the comments where you began. I read every story. And someone scrolling past tonight may need to hear that they're not alone. We share stories like this every week. So if you don't want to miss the next one, take a moment to subscribe before you go. Thank you for spending this time with me. Let's keep walking through these stories together.